Two girls on fire in a town built of stone. You laugh in the kitchen, I feel it in my bones. You are forbidden on your street, but in my arms you're finally free.
There is a place between fear and wanting where I learned to say your name slowly, where the walls stop telling you that you don't belong, and the only language that exists is the one we invented. Bronx girl, you got here without a map. Now you find out some places have no way back. December arrived with snow. Not the decorative snow of New England postcards. The real kind, heavy and unannounced, that starts on a Monday night and doesn't ask permission, that shuts down sidewalks and transforms the campus into a version of itself that seems to belong to another time. I had never lived somewhere it snowed for real. In the Bronx, it snowed. But the Bronx absorbs snow differently. It lasts hours before turning into that specific gray slush of New York sidewalks, mixed with road salt and traffic and the lives of too many people passing over it. At Harwick, the snow stayed. It stayed in the leafless trees, on the rooftops of the stone buildings, on the paths the maintenance crew cleared before dawn, but that snowed over again before morning. It stayed in a way that transformed the silence of the campus into something physical, textured, that entered through the ears differently from ordinary silence. I woke up on the Monday of the first snowfall and stood at the window for longer than I had time for. Priya was sleeping behind me. Outside, the campus was white and quiet and absurdly beautiful, and I thought about Sloane Whitfield in the way I had stopped trying not to think about her, which was itself a form of decision I still didn't know how to name completely. Since the Saturday in front of Whitmore Hall, there had been a silence between us, not the hostile kind, not the silence of two people avoiding each other with intention. It was a transitional silence, the kind that exists between one thing and the next thing, when both people know something has changed but neither one is ready to be the first to name how large the change is. She hadn't shown up at the library on the following Wednesday. I had stayed at the table until 10:15 before admitting I was waiting and going home. The semester ended in 2 weeks. There was the usual end-of-term pressure, final essays, revisions, that specific Harwick December state where the library stayed open until midnight and there were students with dark circles and expressions of sophisticated despair in every hallway. I fit myself into that pressure with the specific gratitude of someone who needed an external reason to organize their thoughts. The final essay for Dr. Carter's seminar was the most important one, 15 pages on a topic of my choice within the scope of the course. I had chosen to write about the legitimization of inequality through institutional narratives of merit, which Dr. Carter had approved with an ambitious and inevitably personal, which is not necessarily a flaw. I was in the library on Tuesday night, on page 8 of the draft, when my phone vibrated with a message from a number I hadn't saved but recognized immediately from the Boston area code. "Are you still going to the archive on Thursday? Dr. Carter mentioned he kept some documents aside for you on the Hollis case." I looked at the message for a moment. "How do you have my number?" I wrote. The response took 2 minutes. "Dr. Carter distributes participant contacts before field trips. Didn't you check the list?" I hadn't checked the list. I had assumed it was an emergency contact sheet nobody used. "I'm going Thursday," I wrote. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. "Can I come with you?" I stared at that message for longer than it took to answer a simple question. "It's a public archive," I wrote eventually. "That's a yes with reservations." "It's a yes," I corrected. The 3 dots appeared again. And then, 9 o'clock at the campus entrance. 9 o'clock. I put the phone down on the table and looked at the essay draft, which was open on page 8, in a paragraph about how institutions use the language of opportunity to naturalize structures of exclusion. It took 40 minutes before I could write again. Thursday morning, it was 10 below zero. I was at the campus entrance at 8:55, wearing the heaviest coat I owned, and the awareness that I had checked the mirror for longer than usual before leaving, which I wasn't allowing myself to consider relevant. Sloane arrived at 9 on the dot. She was wearing a long dark gray coat that had probably been made specifically for this climate, and there was snow in her loose blonde hair because she had walked from somewhere without a hood, and there was on her cheeks that specific red that cold air produces that the morning light made more visible. She was carrying 2 coffees. She held one out to me. "You drink it black?" she said. Not a question. She had been paying attention. I took the coffee. "Thank you." She nodded. We walked to the subway station in silence, not the transitional silence of the previous week, but a different one, which had come out the other side of the tension and arrived somewhere that had no name yet but was easier to inhabit. The Cambridge to Boston subway had that heat of public transit in winter that is simultaneously suffocating and comforting, and I stood holding the bar while Sloane stood half a meter away, and her perfume arrived even with all the overlapping smells of the car. "You didn't come to the library last week," I said without planning to say it. She looked at me. "I know." "Why?" A pause. The subway passed through a station. "Because I needed time to decide what I wanted to say the next time we were in the same place," she said, "and I don't know how to have important conversations halfway." "What did you decide to say?" The subway slowed. "We arrived." "I decided to let the conversation come when it came," she said as the doors opened, instead of preparing it until it became a speech. We got off. The Boston cold was different from Cambridge cold. More wind, more concrete, more city. "That's progress," I said. "It's a lot of progress," she said, and there was humor in it, and I let the humor reach me. The archive was quieter than during the seminar visit. It was 10 in the morning on a Thursday in December, and there were only 2 other researchers at the long tables, and the woman at the entrance greeted Sloane by name because she was clearly a regular. The Hollis case was a correspondence from 1831 between 2 Massachusetts politicians about the question of land ownership by the region's indigenous peoples. A set of letters Dr. Carter had set aside because there was a specific pattern of language relevant to my thesis about institutional narratives of merit and exclusion. We settled at a table in the back, away from the other researchers, with white cotton gloves the archive required for handling original documents. And for the first hour we worked in functional silence, the kind I knew from the library, 2 sets of attention coexisting without collision. But there was something different now in that silence, a permeability that hadn't existed before. "Here," Sloane said in a low voice, pushing a letter toward me. "3rd paragraph." I leaned over the document. The handwriting was the ornate 19th century cursive, dense and elaborate but legible with attention. The 3rd paragraph described the process by which the lands would be redistributed as an opportunity for participation in the nation's progress. Exactly the language structure I was analyzing. "It's perfect," I said. "It's horrible," she said. "But it's perfect for your argument." I turned my head. She was 30 centimeters away, looking at the document with that concentration I had seen in the archive before, on the bus back from Boston, in the library, that quality of attention she gave to things that mattered. "You read the draft of my essay?" "Dr. Carter asked me to review the first-year students' essays as part of the assistantship." A pause. "Yours was different from the others." "Different how?" "Braver." She looked at me. "You write like someone who doesn't have much to lose by being honest." "I don't have my name on a building." "No, you have something harder to have." "What?" She stayed with the question for a moment. "Clarity about what you came here to do," she said. "Most of us don't have that." I looked at her. "You have it," I said. "I know what they expect me to come here to do. That's different." There was something in that distinction, in the precision with which she articulated it, in the absence of any performative resentment, that reached me in a way I didn't expect. It wasn't the podium Sloane, nor the hallway Sloane with Bex, nor completely the bus Sloane. It was some version of her that existed in the spaces between the other versions that appeared when there was enough time and enough silence and white cotton gloves over documents from 1831. I went back to the document, but the phrase stayed with me. At 12:30, the archivist announced the archive would close for an hour for lunch. We came out onto Beacon Street with the Boston cold arriving through our coats and me with no specific plan for what to do with the next hour. Sloane looked right and left with the quick orientation of someone who knows the city and said, "There's a place 3 blocks from here that has the best French onion soup in Boston, possibly in all of New England." Possibly? I haven't done a rigorous comparative study, but I have a reasonably sized sample. I laughed. It was the kind of response I hadn't expected from her, and which, for that reason, arrived in a way expected responses don't. We walked the 3 blocks into the wind and arrived at a small place simply called Fenwick's. 10 tables, brick walls, the smell of garlic and red wine and bread baking. The kind of place that exists in every big city, but that you only find if someone takes you, that never appears on any restaurant list because the people who frequent it don't want it to. The owner, a white-haired man who was in fact named Fenwick, greeted Sloane by her first name and put us at a table near the window overlooking the snow-covered back garden. "You come here often?" I said. "Since high school?" She looked at the menu she clearly didn't need. "My mother brought me for the first time when I was 14. She said every person needs a place where nobody knows their last name. I stayed with that. And here they don't? Here I'm the blonde girl who likes French onion soup and sometimes comes in with archive documents in her bag. The corner of her mouth but warm this time. That's enough. Was your mother like that?" Something shifted slightly in her expression. It didn't close, but became more careful. "She was," Sloane said. And the past tense was there, clear, without drama but present. "I didn't know," I said. 4 years ago. She put the menu on the table. She was the one who taught me there's a difference between what you owe the family name and what you owe yourself. I'm still trying to find exactly where that line is. Fenwick brought bread without anyone asking. Sloane took a piece with the naturalness of someone who is in a place where they can be natural. And there was something in that small gesture, in this version of her that wasn't being observed, that wasn't being president of anything, that I kept with a specific care. "My grandmother is like that," I said. "She's 82 years old and still finds ways to tell me that the limits I put on myself are, in her words, self-deception with a more elegant name." Sloane looked at me. "She sounds terrible," she said. "In the best way. She's absolutely terrible." I took some bread too. "She called last week to say I should be studying Latin." "Why Latin?" "Because the Romans understood power." Sloane was quiet for a moment, and then she laughed. Not the reception laugh, not the beautiful and complete laugh that didn't reach her eyes. A real laugh that came from a different place, that reached the whole face, that lasted a second longer than the controlled laughs and which, when it ended, left something different in the air between us. I noticed. Of course I noticed. We had lunch for an hour and a half that passed with the specific speed of time when you're in a warm place in winter with good food and a conversation that doesn't require effort. She told me about the first time she entered the historical archive. 12 years old, with her mother, looking for documents about an ancestor who had served in Congress in the 1880s, and how she had become so absorbed in a piece of correspondence about Reconstruction that the archivist had to tell her the archive was closing. I told her about Mrs. Morrison and the copy of Beloved, and about how I spent an entire summer rereading the book, trying to understand exactly what my teacher had seen in me to give me that specific book. "What did you conclude?" Sloane asked. "That she saw someone who needed permission to take their own perspective seriously," I said. "And she chose to give that permission in the form of a book instead of a speech, which was smarter." "You already took your perspective seriously before that." "Yes, But there's a difference between taking it seriously out of necessity and taking it seriously by choice. Sloane looked at me for a moment with that attention she gave to things that mattered. I needed to hear that, she said. It wasn't about you. I know, but I needed to hear it anyway. Fenwick brought coffee without asking. Outside it had started snowing again. Back at the archive in the afternoon, we found the most important document. It was a letter from 1833 from one politician to another, describing the process by which individuals of certain backgrounds would be gradually integrated into the region's economic structure, with a language so precise in its cruelty disguised as benevolence that I spent too long staring at it before. I could write anything in my notebook. Are you okay? Sloane said in a low voice. I'm processing the elegance with which this man described a policy of systematic exclusion as a historic opportunity, I said. That's the specific talent of certain institutions. It's the specific talent of certain people within institutions. She was quiet for a moment. Maya. My name in her mouth had stopped catching me off guard and started catching me in a different way, harder to describe. I know what Beck said left a shadow on how you see me. I didn't look away. Not on how I see you, I said. On how I see myself in the context of how you might see me. That's different. She thought about that. Then let me say it clearly, she said. Not to undo what Beck said. She doesn't have the power to undo what she said. But because you deserve to hear it from me, in my own words, I didn't approach you for any reason related to the inclusion program or to what you represent institutionally. I approached you because you looked at me in a way I wasn't used to being looked at. How? Like I was someone who could disappoint. The phrase arrived in a way I didn't expect. Everyone can disappoint, I said. That's not how people treat me. There was no self-pity in it, just that clinical observation I had noticed was how she talked about herself when she was being honest. People with my last name on this campus are treated like constants, like foundations. You looked at me like I was a variable. You are a variable. I know. She looked at me. That's why I keep coming back. The archivist passed near our table, and we both returned to the documents with the synchrony of people who had reached a tacit understanding without needing to say it. But what she had said stayed in the air between us like snow that hadn't yet landed. We left the archive at 4 p.m, with the day already darkening the way days in December in Boston darken, fast, without enough warning, as if the sun had other commitments. We walked along Beacon Street toward the subway station, and there was fresh snow on the ground covering the old snow, and my breath came out in vapor in the cold, and Sloane walked beside me with the step of someone who knows where they're going even when they're not certain. There's something I want to show you, she said suddenly. I looked at her. Now? It's on the way, more or less. More or less meant we turned twice before reaching the subway and arrived at a small park I hadn't seen before. Not large, not famous, just a square of green between stone buildings that in summer was probably just another Boston park, but that in December, with snow covering the benches and the branches of the bare trees, had that quality of a place that exists outside of time. In the center of the park was an iron bench covered in snow, and beside the bench was a small bronze plaque I couldn't read from a distance. What is this? I asked. Come. We reached the bench. The plaque read, In memory of Eleanor Marsh Whitfield, 1962-2020. She taught us that the rarest courage is the courage to be exactly who you are. I was quiet. Your mother, I said. She loved this park. Sloane looked at the plaque with that expression I had learned to recognize as hers when she was somewhere real, without layers. She worked in an office 2 streets up. She used to come eat lunch here when she needed a place where nobody expected anything from her. Like Fenwick's. Like Fenwick's. A pause. I've never brought anyone here before. I understood the weight of that. I didn't say anything, because there are things for which words are the wrong instrument, and this was one of those moments. I stood beside her in silence, looking at the plaque and the snow and the park that had belonged to someone else before it belonged to this one. After a while, Sloane said, "She would have liked you." "You don't know that." "I do. She liked people who looked at the world like it was a problem worth solving." The corner of her mouth but soft. And she had very little patience for people who confused privilege with merit. "She sounds extraordinary." She was. Sloane pushed her hands into the pockets of the long coat. "Sometimes I wonder what she'd think of the choices I'm making, whether I'm being brave enough or just being the brave version of what's safe." "Is there a difference?" She said there was. She said most people confuse the two their whole lives. The wind moved the snow from the branches above us, and it fell in small spirals that the low afternoon light turned almost golden. "And you?" I asked. "Can you tell the difference?" She looked at me, and there was something in that look. Something that arrived with the slowness of snow landing. Not with the speed of a decision, but with the inevitability of something that had already been happening before it was recognized. That was different from all the previous looks. "I'm learning," she said. And then she leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a party kiss, wasn't an impulse or alcohol or context, pushing two bodies toward each other without real intention underneath. It was a chosen kiss. Small at first, almost a question. With the cold all around and the snow in her hair and the sandalwood perfume I had known before I knew anything else about her. I didn't pull back. She pulled back slightly, searching my face. "Maya." "I know," I said. And there was so much contained in those two words. The whole semester, all the fifth rules, all the looks and perfumes and functional silences, that nothing more was needed. She kissed me again. And this time there was no question. There was an answer. On the subway back to Cambridge, we sat side by side without the careful space of previous trips, and there was snow melting in both our hair and the car's heat arriving gradually, and I looked forward with the feeling of someone who has jumped and hasn't yet reached the bottom but knows they will. "I need to tell you something," Sloane said. The quality of the phrase made something contract in my chest. "Now?" "No." She looked forward too. "But soon. There's something you need to know before someone tells you another way." "About Ethan?" "About Ethan." A pause. "About what Ethan represents." And about a conversation I had at the beginning of the semester that I should have told you about before now. I sat with that. It wasn't a small shadow. It was the kind of phrase that changes the temperature of a situation, that puts a visible edge on a horizon that until then had seemed open. "Okay," I said. Not because it was, but because I had chosen to be, until there was proven reason not to be. Sloane turned her head and looked at me with that full attention. "You are the bravest person I know," she said. "You haven't known me long enough to know that." "I've known you since September." The corner of her mouth, soft. At Harwick, September is long enough to know what matters about a person. The subway arrived in Cambridge. We got off into the cold, and I walked back to campus beside Sloane Whitfield with fresh snow falling on both of us, thinking that there was something she needed to tell me, and that I didn't know what it was, and that part of me wanted to delay that information for exactly the time it would take to keep what had happened today. Fenwick's, the archive, the bronze plaque, the park in the cold, the kiss that was chosen, without anything yet having cost anything. But I knew, with that part of me that always knew things before wanting to know them, that the cost was coming, and that it was going to be high. That night, Priya was awake when I came in. She looked at me once and closed her book. "Something happened," she said. It wasn't a question. I took off my coat still with snow on the shoulders and sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor for a moment. She took me to a park where there's a plaque for her mother, I said. And then she kissed me. Priya was quiet for a respectful moment. Maya, I know. How was it? I thought about the question honestly. It was exactly like I knew it was going to be, I said. Which is the problem? Why is it a problem? Because she said she needs to tell me something before someone tells me another way. Priya went quieter. Do you know what it is? I'm not certain, but I have a feeling. Ethan. Ethan. Priya breathed in slowly. What are you going to do? I looked at the brick ceiling that had become a kind of confidant over the course of the semester, repository of all the thoughts I didn't know how to put anywhere else. Listen, I said. That's what I'm going to do. Listen to what she has to say. And then? I don't know. But what I didn't say, what stayed stored in the place where I kept things that didn't yet have enough form to be spoken, was that the kiss had been chosen. That there were no shortcuts or alcohol or context pushing two bodies in each other's direction without real intention underneath. That chosen was the part that didn't go away, regardless of what came after. And that because of that, exactly because of that. What came after was going to hurt in a specific way I was starting to be able to measure. The fifth rule had been broken, and I discovered, in the dark of the room with Priya sleeping beside me, that I wasn't angry about that. I was afraid of what it would cost to have broken it, which was different, and which was, in some way I still couldn't fully name, so much worse.